Channel.
Good evening, welcome to the program. Well, after 7 months of defending key budget positions, the backdowns, backflips, policy changes have come in pretty rapid fire over the last couple of weeks, from the GP co-payment to paid parental leave, changes on higher education, defence, entitlements and climate change. Will it be enough? Will it get the government out of the political hole it's in? We're going to look at that, and also whether the government has its economic and budget settings right, with more troubling news today on the unemployment front, creeping up to a 12-year high of 6.3%. And as we go to air tonight, we've also just had an announcement from the Prime Minister at the speech we were seeing just a few minutes ago at the Recognise event that he hopes we will have a referendum on constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians on the 27th of May 2017. So still a little over 2 years away from now, but the aim is to get it right rather than get it done early. Joining us tonight to look at all of this, Paul Fletcher is the Parliamentary Secretary for Communications, Miranda Devine, columnist with the Daily Telegraph, Tim Ayres, the New South Wales Secretary with the AMWU, also a member of Labor's National Executive, and Nick Champion, the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for Health. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Now, I want to start with the economy and the news today on unemployment. We did actually see jobs growth, largely part-time, but all up 42 or 43,000 jobs in the last month. More people looking for work, though, has pushed up the unemployment rate to 6.3%, highest, as I say, in about 12 years. Paul Fletcher, how much of a worry is that?
Well, clearly we are going through an economic transition. We've had an extraordinarily good run as a nation with the resources boom. We need to move to other sectors picking up the economic slack. We need to continue to generate economic growth. That's, for example, why we've been so focused on securing free trade agreements with China, with Korea, with Japan, three countries that make up over 60% of our exports. This is all about stimulating the private sector, stimulating business, assisting Australian business to capture opportunities to create jobs.
Yeah, and as you know, those free trade agreements are great, but the benefits don't kick in for some years, with the significant benefits. So what is the plan right now to get people into work? Because the figures today show there are 777,000 people looking for work, unable to find work.
Well, the Abbott government has a whole series of actions which are designed to free up the economy, stimulate the economy. So, for example, we've taken $2 billion of red tape burden off business. You know, what was happening under the previous government was this view that you can just keep cranking up the number of people who work for government. What we need to do is get the private sector firing to create the jobs that we need and to continue to maintain our prosperity.
Why aren't they, is what I'm getting at. Yes, you've scrapped the carbon tax and removed some red tape, but we're seeing unemployment creep higher. We're seeing more people on the jobless queue.
And we are working calmly through establishing the economic settings that allow business to prosper, business to grow and business to create jobs. The private sector is the engine of growth, it's the engine of employment.
So what are you actually doing to generate that private sector growth? What more are you offering?
Well, we've had a whole series of steps, David. I've talked about the free trade agreement, I've talked about removing the mining tax, removing the carbon tax. Let's just talk about removing the mining tax just for a second. This industry is so crucial to Australia's prosperity. Our export earnings are critically dependent.
But they were barely paying anything anyway, let's be honest.
And this change has been about taking pressure off a sector which is one of the strongest and most important in our economy and backing the mining sector, backing the resources sector, backing business.
But you just said we're transitioning out of mining. So
the Abbott government...
The point here is you need to generate jobs in these new sectors, not in mining.
What we need to do is create the economic conditions in which business can prosper, because it's business that creates jobs. Now, government is not good at identifying micro sectors. What government should be doing is creating the conditions for business to prosper, and that's been an absolute focus for the Abbott government.
Miranda, is there a confidence problem in the economy at the moment?
I think, look, these figures are just more of the news that really will focus the minds of the government and the electorate, and it really brings home how important getting the budget settings right is. And so far we've seen confidence has fallen. The budget selling, the budget management, the budget message has been woeful since May, and polls have fallen, opinion polls have fallen for the government. From May on, they went stubbornly negative, and at the same time, confidence has fallen. So you're not going to have people employing. If you have a small business, you're not going to employ anyone if you're worried about the economy. So that's crucial.
It's a difficult one, Tim, isn't it? Because this government can't really start stimulating the economy, and arguably nor should it right now. Do you think where the economy is at the moment, there is a case for either cutting taxes or spending a bit more to stimulate the economy?
Well, the last time that unemployment was at this rate was 12 years ago, and Tony Abbott was the employment minister. There are some fundamental problems here. The government has done its best to drive a nail into the coffin of significant parts of our manufacturing sector. Those job losses haven't flowed through to the economy yet. We'll see catastrophic job losses in South Australia and Victoria over the course of next year.
They haven't happened yet.
It's going to get worse and worse and worse. There is, as Miranda says, a confidence issue in the economy. It's not just about the budget. The job of the government, in part, is to talk the place up. And what the government's been doing, particularly in the areas that I'm engaged with, is talking the capability and capacity of Australian industry down. And that sent a signal to the community. It sent a signal to the investment community. Far from we're open for business, it's don't darken our doorstep with investment ideas and new proposals.
You know that a lot of these companies were shutting down under Labor. I mean, when was the first of the last three car makers? When did they announce they were going? It was under Labor's watch.
Certainly there was a prospect of a car industry that had a serious future. Now we see the dollar falling down to below 87 cents with a capacity, if the government hadn't destroyed the industry, with a capacity to export, a capacity to build a real future. Advanced manufacturing in this country has a strong future if it's got the support of a government that talks it up.
That's why we've put nearly $200 million into 5 centres to bring better together the research work with key sectors, including mining services and advanced manufacturing. That was in the innovation and competitiveness statement released just a few weeks ago.
It's a very poor replacement for a real approach in those industries.
All right, what does that mean?
And of course, as the mining investment boom tapers off, it absolutely underscores the point.
Okay.
We have to have a diverse economy, and the new jobs aren't coming. That's
what's the answer? What, Nick Champion, do you believe actually needs to happen now?
Well, look, this government smashed confidence, let's make no mistake of it, and part of smashing that confidence has been to undermine families' economic security. And it doesn't matter whether you look at the GP co-payment or other measures that they've taken, changes in family payments, changes to the pension.
None of which have been actually applied yet.
But they've all served to smash people's confidence at a time when they're already worried. There's plenty of stuff on the news, particularly about the international situation, and they've been worried basically since the GFC. And what we've seen the government do is take a wrecking ball to the car industry, and then Paul tells us, well, we can't micromanage the economy. Then he tells us they've dumped $200 million into these innovation precincts. Well, it's either one or the other. They tell us they can't support the car industry.
So what should happen then?
Well, look, I think obviously with the car industry, now we have to manage the transition, which will be very difficult indeed. And I can tell you in my local area, I see absolutely no sign of the government making any attempt to help those people move to other jobs, to create other industries. There are other opportunities, most notably in horticulture and defence, in health, but we see no help from the government. And that's the problem. They take
are those things they should do?
Well, the difficulty is they take this laissez-faire approach to some industries and not to others. Tim's quite right. If the car industry had been supported, they would have been looking at exporting, in particular, police cars to the United States at the moment, because the dollar's...
Let's just remind ourselves that there was hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money going into these sectors. Of course we want the car industry to succeed, but it needs to succeed on the basis of winning business.
Not subsidising each car to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars.
We've heard this story time after time.
At $1.10, It was very, very difficult for any manufacturing business and for many primary industries. But the dollar's not there anymore. The dollar, every time the dollar a cent below 90, the car industry starts to become very, very competitive. And it would have been one of the industries which took up the slack as the mining boom came off. But they never had that opportunity because they were never supported in the way that every other car industry is around the world. And every car on the road is subsidised by a taxpayer.
Well, you're talking about
it might be a German taxpayer, it might be an American taxpayer.
Are you telling me they can be competitive if the exchange rate drops? You're telling me they can be competitive?
Indeed.
They can only survive if there's very substantial additional taxpayers' dollars.
Provided they get the same support that every other government around the world gives their car industries. And we know why they do that, because they're big employment generators. They're big research and development generators.
I understand your defence of the car industry. It's a long-standing position for you and certainly in your electorate, but it seems to me that the problem's broader than that. It's about generating jobs right across the economy, and particularly in the sectors that we need to transition to with the mining boom tapering off. And I'm yet to hear answers on how we do that. Is it worth looking at tax cuts? Is it worth looking at ways to actually generate jobs?
I just think one thing you need to point out, though, and Nick doesn't acknowledge, is that his government, Labor, actually caused the problem in the first place that is affecting confidence in the economy. You know, we are now paying $1 billion a month in interest to pay back the debt that your big spending Rudd and Gillard governments ratcheted up. So that you can't just pretend that since September that the Abbott government has caused the problems in the economy.
So we talk about confidence. The thing that is most corrosive of confidence is a sense that the government does not have control. And when people saw the previous government producing deficit after deficit after deficit, there was a sense of confidence in the economy because people knew that the federal government did not have a debt.
All right. Well,
that equipped us to respond to the global financial crisis.
More interested in solutions than the blame, which is going back and forth.
Part of the solution is getting the budget under control. That is what we are focused on. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lack of responsible
almost
engagement.
doubled the deficit over the course of the government's so far of the government's term. It's the silliest.
If you're on the national executive of the Labor Party, what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about being responsible about engaging?
That, Paul, is an administrative role. I don't have a policy role. I only get to have a policy role when I come on programs like this and get interrupted by people like you. The problem in people searching for solutions in these areas is partly that some of the silly claims that are made by people like Miranda and Paul about the position of the economy a couple of years ago. The truth is, the previous government had a choice. It had a choice between 200,000 unemployed people and spending some money and running some programs to try and fix the problem. Just imagine what it would look like. Just imagine what it would look like if we had 200,000 long-term unemployed people.
Going to
I can see. I'm going to need a whistle tonight. Paul, let me just get back to what you were saying about the need to get the budget back under control. And I think there's general agreement that yes, we do need to eventually get the budget back into balance. Is that more important, though, than protecting jobs right now?
Well, it's part of a multi-stranded policy. There's a whole range of things.
But which is the priority, jobs or the budget?
Look, it's a complicated world. There's a lot of things that government has to be doing. There's a lot of things that the Abbott government is doing. Getting the budget under control is one. Getting the regulatory burden of business is another. Opening up new trade opportunities is another. These are all steps that we're taking. Putting money into the Medical Research Future Fund to take our existing successful medical research sector, which has produced many companies that have successfully commercialised and are exporting, building on that with the Medical Research Future Fund, which when it gets to $20 billion of its target amount will be roughly doubling the amount going into
I know all of that. I'm just wondering if there's a need to rejig the priorities. Instead of putting money into a fund, for example, that would be great in 10 years, put some money into stimulating jobs growth right now, put some money into the economy, put some money through the tills of all the retailers and service industries that need some support.
I think the most important thing is creating that sense of confidence and taking the pressure off business, because it is the private sector that generates the jobs that we need.
Let me put the same question to you, Nick Champion. What's more important now, jobs or returning the budget to surplus?
Well, jobs are always a critical test for a government, and the choice we had was to back in jobs in the middle of a global financial crisis. It wasn't something caused in Australia, it was something caused in New York and London and Europe and places like that. And we had to deal with it, and we dealt with it by prioritising jobs. But the problem for the government is they talk about confidence, they talk about adults being in charge, but what they've done is undermine confidence and undermine people's economic security. And of course, you can't then roll up, 5 minutes before midnight, 5 minutes before Christmas, say, I'll spend up big, everybody, the economy's not going so well. So it's a very strange set of arguments. I personally think that rates could be a bit lower, I think that would probably do more for Main Street than anything else. I think the dollar coming down has been a big factor in competitiveness in the companies in my area, whether they be car companies or whether they be wineries or primary producers. So some of these things are, matters for other arms of government, the Independent Reserve Bank Board and others. But this government's failed the fundamentals, which is, sure, you have to move to a balanced budget, but you shouldn't do that by scaring everybody.
I think we got that message. But
out of spending.
The point here, Miranda, is you shouldn't panic about what's going on, because there are some factors there, like the dollar coming down. There's the prospect of an interest rate cut or two next year. All of these things should help.
Fuel being cheaper makes a big difference.
Yep. That should help next year, you would think. Who knows what will happen with commodity prices? But none of this makes life easy for Joe Hockey, does it, in terms of getting the budget back into balance?
No, and look, I think this is why the government needs to get rid of the barnacles or get their messages of the budget straight that they haven't had straight since May. They need to really do that before the end of the year so that they can start afresh next year with a really clear plan. And what should that message be, though? I mean, should it be, we need to get the budget back into balance, but we're going to take our time with it because the economy isn't as strong as it should be? No, because, I just look at Costello's first budget in 1996. The Howard government was elected in March 96. By the end of that year, Costello had legislated pretty much all of the budget and had legislated some industrial relations reform. He brought down the budget in August, $8 billion worth of cuts over the next 2 years, and it was, there was a violent reaction, but by the next year, things were calm. Whereas this is just a long, slow death by 1,000 cuts.
But that's a very illustrative example. I never thought Peter Costello was much good, and didn't think John Howard was much good either. You'll be surprised to learn. But they had a coherent message for the economy, and to their credit, they told people what they were going to do. It's true it's a multi-stranded approach, Paul. It's a multi-stranded approach that is all over the shop. The incoming government said whatever it needed to do to get into government. The problem for the government, as they came in, was that the things that they said that they weren't going to do, their ideological obsessions meant they've had to do. Those policies are incompatible with the sorts of issues that Nick's talking about where families are at. And now they're caught in a terrible problem. They can't knock off barnacles.
We inherited a situation from a government that ran deficit after deficit. So $48 billion deficit was what we were left for 2013-14. So we're now systematically getting the budget back under control over a number of years. So there's a stepped process to get the budget back over the forward estimates to about $3 billion in deficit.
And is that the right time frame still?
Last year of the forward estimates. Because of the scale of the deficit, you need to do it in a credible way. Remember Wayne Swan told the Australian people the 4 years of surpluses I announced tonight, he couldn't deliver it because of the scale of the turnaround he was trying to achieve.
Okay, but is that time frame still about right, 3 or 4 years to get back to surplus? We've got a credible path that we've laid out to get back to surplus. And that doesn't need adjusting, is what I'm getting at.
Well, that path has been laid out as one that is achievable and credible. Wayne Swan did no good for confidence at all by saying we're going to get back to surplus and then completely failing to do it and failing to understand the scale and magnitude of the challenge. Now, we consistently said we were going to do that, and what we've seen from Labor is such a degree of irresponsibility that not only are they opposing many government measures, but they're also opposing their own measures. $5 billion worth of measures they took to the last election that they said were savings measures they would introduce if they came to government, they're now opposing.
Well, I've got to take a break. I want to drill down a little bit more on a couple of specifics, the GP code payment, the changes that were announced this week, and what they'll particularly mean for GPs, for patients as well, and also the paid parental leave changes that the PM's flagged. We don't know where that's going to land. I want to take a look at that. Stay with us.
Want to get rid of unsightly hairs but sick of cuts and nicks? Introducing the Remington Wet Tech Nano Trimmer. Comfortably remove hair with no nicks or cuts guaranteed. Trim nose hair, ear hair, plus eyebrows and sideburns. Even use it in the shower. Just wash the blades for a smooth trim every time. What a difference! A great gift for him or her with the Remington Lady Trimmer. Get summer-ready skin with Remington. Available now at Shaver Shop or online at shavershop.com.au.
Yeah, so look, we'll have a patio there, brick this, pave all this area. You'll never have to mow again.
You'll never have to mow again. You'll never have to mow again. You'll never have to mow again.
With 4-stroke Honda quality from just $5.99, nothing will stop you loving your Honda. The new Honda mower range, only at specialist dealers.
I just want to find the perfect hotel for us. And I want to book it for the best price. Hotel Trivago.
Budget Direct is proud to announce we've won Money Magazine's cheapest car insurance award again for 2015. See how much you could save right now. Get 20% off car insurance with Budget Direct's smarter online discounts. Get a quote now.
Smarter, cheaper, winner!
At NAB, we back businesses that back themselves. That's why we're committed to lending $1 billion a month. More yes for business, less missed opportunities. Call 13 10 12. NAB.
Introducing new bubbly honeycomb from Cadbury Dairy Milk.
Christmas is for good, good, good guys. Pay less, cause we smash your prices. Good, 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 we're the good guys.
Christmas is for good guys. Jump in-store or online for superhero prices.
In this place of pots and pans and slightly blunt knives lives the cook. Not for her the ready meal. The cook weaves magic. This isn't hocus pocus. The cook has powers, a pinch of faith, and a good measure of Lurpak butter. Yes, this is the cook in her place of pots, pans, and slightly blunt knives.
Big night, eh?
No. Big day. Got a mountain at work, massive prezzo, lifts will be out, sales reports, quick gym, dinner with the in-laws.
Big days start with Barocca.
Good to have you with us tonight. I want to look more closely at the GP code payment. This was, I think, the most significant policy shift that Tony Abbott has, in fact, made as Prime Minister altogether, full stop. Instead of the $7 code payment announced back in the May budget, a $5 optional code payment. Essentially, doctors will get $5 less in the Medicare rebate from the government. It's up to them to decide whether to impose it. Most of them presumably will. Miranda, what do you make of this change? Is it more palatable now? Is it a better policy, as the Prime Minister says?
Well, it's definitely a clever way of doing it by regulating it rather than having to rely on this fractious Senate.
They can still disallow it, but it's a bit harder.
So it is, you know, it's a good idea. It's in line with what the Audit Commission recommended, to have a price signal. You know, I don't know why they didn't initially make it much smaller. $7 was difficult, maybe $1 or $2, because the money isn't going to go into health, which is the biggest single, you know, growth expenditure burden on the budget. It's going into this medical research fund. And again, although that's a nice idea. It's again the essential problem with that mixed messages of the budget, which is, are we tightening the belt because we need to get the budget under control, or is there the luxury to spend on paid parental leave, medical research fund, and now childcare? You know, is this a big government spending issue, or is it we need to cut back for the moment, and then we can do those lovely things when the budget's a bit more under control?
One of the biggest parts of this change is that kids, pensioners, veterans, aged care residents are all exempt, so nothing changes for them. They're not hit with this. Does that make it more palatable in your view?
It's certainly a significant concession. The problem is, 6 months ago, coalition MPs privately conceding that the policy was absolutely dead. The only people who've maintained that the policy's alive have been the poor people sent out by the coalition to spruik it because they've had to. So this has been a policy that's been dead in the water for some time. It's certainly, as Miranda said, a clever approach. I think people will see through it. The problem is it's a complicated nautical manoeuvre, which is remove barnacle A, replace it with barnacle B.
Okay, but what's wrong with the outcome here?
Well, it is going to mean that the cost is going to be passed on, and everybody in the community understands that. That there will be...
But why shouldn't most of us pay something?
Well, certainly this is the central issue, of course. The fundamental issue is why should people have access to universal health care? It's a very important Australian value. Very important Australian value. Most people pay for it through the tax system, is the truth. Most people pay through the tax system. There is a fundamental fairness to Medicare. These guys... Paul, I know, as a young Liberal activist, would have been out in shorts campaigning against Medicare when it was first invented, hanging out with Bruce Shepherd and that crowd.
Let's get to some facts rather than
there's a fundamental hostility to Medicare.
The fact is, the Medicare levy raises about $10 billion a year. At the moment, we're spending about $20 billion a year on providing Medicare, on providing services. That's risen from $8 billion 10 years ago, and it's on track to rise to $34 billion.
Yeah, but just on this point, I mean, do you know what the GDP was 10 years ago and what it will be in 10 years?
Medicare levy was never...
It hasn't actually changed.
No, that's not right at all.
Medicare levy was never designed for that.
It's increased substantially ahead of GDP.
It hasn't.
But the key point... The key point is that at the moment, the impression is this is something that costs nothing, so you can go to a bulk bill doctor. About 70% of non-concessional Australians who are not in a concessional category are bulk billed at the moment, and there's no charge to you. And so, for example, I must say I often wonder, I'm an asthmatic, every now and then I need to go and get my script repeated. I go to a doctor, I say I'm an asthmatic, he says, what are you on? I tell him, he writes out the script, gives it to me. I leave, and the system has been that you can claim the full Medicare benefit there. So one of the elements of the package that was announced was more detail in the way the rebate is charged, so that there'll now be that fuller rebate is only available for a longer consultation.
And this is something that
to try and deal with this problem of so-called 6-minute
this is an important
medicine.
part too that we should mention: timed payments for doctors. If it is less than 10 minutes, I think it's only $12 or something they'll get, and then above 10 minutes it then becomes a $32 payment and so on, and increasing to $64 and then $100 for a 40-minute plus consultation. Labor is on board with that?
Well, I don't know about on board. We're prepared to look at the shorter consultation, but the real problem with this is it's not optional, right? Doctors are going to pass this cost on, and it won't be people like Paul and I who have to pay, poor us. It'll be some
You'd
asthmatic...
be happy to pay it, wouldn't you?
Well, I'm on a good income, but imagine...
So you should pay.
Well,
I'll let you get to that point, but you should pay,
imagine an asthmatic or a diabetic who, say, works 30 hours a week or 15 hours a week at Woolies. And there's plenty of people like that in the economy now, part-time jobs growing, right? So people working 2 or 3 part-time jobs, sometimes 1. Their hours fall. Oh, I won't go to the doctor this week. Now, if they're asthmatic or diabetic, The worst consequence is they end up in hospital rather than seeing a doctor. The doctor is cheap, the hospital is expensive, and this is a problem with Paul's plan.
You could make the same argument about the script.
Well, just listen. I don't interrupt you. Just listen.
You could make the same argument about the script.
Just listen. The problem is, and this is a very big problem, the original $7 copayment, and $5 is not that much less, was knocking off a million visits to the doctor a year. If 1 in 5 of those people ends up in an ED or in a hospital bed, all of these savings disappear because the costs are in the hospitals, not in primary care. So it's the stupidest thing in the world to put up barriers.
It's no problem
It's the
in New Zealand.
stupidest thing in the world to put up barriers to see a doctor.
But Nick, at the moment,
it doesn't make any sense.
Exactly the same kind of system applies when you go to get a script. So if you're an asthmatic, as I know very well from my own experience, when you go and get a script, you contribute towards the cost, and the bulk of the cost comes from the pharmaceutical benefits.
Well, there are two arguments
here.
Like
and so this is...
But the difference is you know what... You've seen the doctor and you know the problem.
This principle that the citizen, putting aside about 8 million people who are going to be in the concessional category, 8.6 million people have a concession card, so they won't be affected by this. But for those who are not in the concessionary category, they are being asked to pay a small contribution towards the cost of a consultation. Why? Because we need to keep the Medicare system sustainable, and we can put our hands over our eyes and pretend that this gap can just keep going on and on and on. We don't have to do anything about it. But a responsible government needs to do something about it.
How else do you pay?
This is the problem.
Okay. How else do you pay for the increasing medical costs, if not this way? How do you do it?
The truth is that you have to make choices in the budget. That's the truth. And the truth is we should allocate enough money to the healthcare system. We should build in the efficiencies.
The budget's $30 or $40 billion in deficit.
Let me finish this point. There's $60 billion a year of Commonwealth money going into health.
We have to make sure that we make the health system more efficient. We have to make sure that the incentives are right. But Paul will never get to meet the kind of people who this hurts.
All right, no, but how do you get the efficiencies?
This issue about price signals is very important.
You find more efficiencies in
the kind of people who I represent, mostly middle-aged men who are tradespeople, the price signal argument is exactly right. They won't trouble themselves to go to the doctor when they see a small symptom. Particularly for our people, some of them with less than the healthiest lifestyles in the world, those will end up being catastrophic, life-threatening illnesses. So it will hurt people. It won't hurt the people around this table, but it will hurt people. What has to happen? We have to build the incentives in the health system that mean that we're putting effort into preventative care.
This may sound unkind, but is it realistic to say they're not going to go to the doctor when there's something that could potentially be a significant health problem because it's $5?
Well, they don't know that because they're fitters and they're boilermakers and they're process workers. It's doctors who know this stuff.
Why would they go to the doctor anyway?
Are they unable to make rational decisions? Is that what you're saying? Your members are unable to make
You just said yourself.
You said it's about price signals.
You go to the doctor, you're asthmatic, you're not quite sure, but you go to the doctor to check.
No, I go because I'll tell you why I go. I go because it's a regulatory requirement that every year you need to get the script renewed. Yeah. That's why I go.
So there's smart things we should do about those sorts of problems.
At the moment, doctors who run bulk billing clinics make $30 out of that, and I'm in there.
So there's all sorts of perverse incentives.
Now, by the way, I'm not let me be clear. I'm not criticising doctors for doing that. That's been the system. But what we've consciously chosen to do is make some changes in the measures that Peter Dutton and the Prime Minister have announced.
Would it be if you had a
give
skin
pharmacists the
problem
capacity
or
to deal with
you should get checked that you're not going to get
repeat
checked?
prescriptions?
I'll give you exactly. It's best practice that a diabetic goes to see a doctor twice a year and gets their blood checked. Right? That's what they have to do. So they have to go, see them. And if they don't go, and if they miss it, and that would be, some of Paul...
so they're not going to go because it costs $10 to go twice to the doctor?
Some of my constituents, that is the price.
Even if
it has that much effect because they live week to week.
They know they're a diabetic.
If you're on, let's say...
So you know you're a diabetic?
Well, Miranda, I think you're out of touch with how a lot of people live. If you're on 15, 25 or 30 hours a week at Woolies...
You don't know how in touch I am with people. I'm a journalist. I talk to people all the time.
Well, what do you think? People make choices.
For the Daily Telegraph.
People make choices every day about their budgets.
Biggest
every day about their budgets.
in this state.
And sometimes it's $5
We're in touch with our readers.
for the kids. or $5 at the doctor, and they might well make the choice to prioritise a kid.
You just talk about these theoretical people who are just so moronic that they won't go and save their lives. They've got cancer or something, or diabetes, and they won't go to the doctor because it's going to cost them $5.
This is a price signal.
Reality?
That's the reality of a price signal.
New Zealand has brought in a price signal, and children under 12, same thing, don't have to pay.
What's your plan? Do you say, let's not worry about the fact that these costs are increasing all the time?
I reject your assertion that's unsustainable. I reject your assertion that's unsustainable.
Just spend.
I don't agree with your. I don't agree with your assertion
with a system where
that's unsustainable.
The great majority of people who are in a position to make a contribution.
If there's no problem with the way health spending is going, is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is that the places that you get efficiencies out of the health system by preventing people from going to hospital, because hospital is the expensive bit of the health system. Yep. You don't do it by putting up barriers for people to get primary care. Because frankly,
Nick Champion, surely you haven't forgotten. Let me just make the point on the point you're making. Yeah. Surely you haven't forgotten already the inability of both Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard to fix that problem that you've identified, the efficiencies in the hospital.
Remember the time when no hospital patient around Australia, hospital patient around Australia was safe from waking up, and all of a sudden there was the Prime Minister at the end of his bed,
trying to find efficiencies,
surrounded by 5 or 6 television cameras, saying, "I'm going to change the health system." Do you remember that?
Well, what did they get wrong?
I guess the thing about it is health reforms are difficult, right? Make no mistake about it, and the structure and the structure of the system mitigates against reform, and I think this is a challenge for both sides because you've got 7 different state governments, and it's like herding cats. You've 7 different state bureaucracies. It's a very big issue.
So what's the answer?
Now, the issue is to prevent people from getting to hospital in the first place. Because the big driver,
so now it's prevention.
Just the big driver are things like diabetes. And obviously, if people are seeing their doctor and the blood sugars are up, you can prevent it before you can get it by changing your lifestyle.
Okay, but
that's the truth of it.
A minute ago, you were saying efficiencies in the hospital system is the way to fund it, right?
But I'm giving you example.
Labor tried for 6 years to find those efficiencies without much luck. Now you're saying prevention's the answer.
I guess the thing is those efficiencies will take a long time to sweep through the system. And like, for instance, in diabetics, we have one of the highest amputation rates in the world. Amputation is very, very expensive. If someone sees a podiatrist, they might not get their leg chopped off. And that's the reality of some of these things. It's the high end, the hospitalisations, that's the cost in. Why would you stop people from seeing their doctor? Why would you discourage them?
And that's a fair argument.
Why would you put up barriers?
David,
it'll cost you more in the long term.
The point I'd make is I think Nick has conceded the point. There is a problem that we need to address here. You've talked about the issues in the health system. What we've got is a very specific reform in the health system directed to saying to the great majority of people who are in a position to contribute towards the cost of a consultation with a doctor, we are proposing to change the system so you'll be asked to make a $5 contribution to the cost. Now, we think that the Australian people will regard that as a reasonable change. They'll observe that it's not materially dissimilar to the kind of co-contribution people are asked for in terms of pharmaceutical benefits.
It ultimately will mean less consultations.
Look, it's a price signal, and there will be instances where people will presumably say, you know what, I don't think I do need to go to the doctor. At the moment, it's costless, and so...
but will fewer consultations lead to more health problems and greater cost ultimately?
Our judgment is, in terms of the overall system effect, that this is a reform worth making. And that's the case we're putting to the Australian people. We think this makes sense.
A price signal in healthcare is a terrific idea, even though it may make people unwell. A price signal in terms of carbon emissions is a terrible idea.
We'll get to carbon emissions. We'll get to that. But I do want to get... Clearly this is still going to be a contentious issue, this co-payment. On paid parental leave, though, Miranda, it's unknown, I guess, where this is going to land, but the PM's clearly signalling that he's willing to shift it and perhaps focus a bit more on childcare. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, look, it's something that both the Tony Shepherd's Audit Commission and the Productivity Commission recommended. So it's a safe thing to do, and unfortunately the paid parental leave had just become such an albatross around the government's neck because, again, it goes back to that issue of you're telling us that you've got to, put a co-payment on, that you've got to cut this, raise income tax, so on, and yet you're going to give you know, women this whiz-bang new benefit. So it's just a bad mixed message. So I think he had to scale it back, and maybe the childcare thing. Again, though, you're spending money.
Will those women earning more than $150,000 access anything?
Well, I mean, what the Prime Minister has said is that we anticipate continuing to have a system of paid parental leave based on a woman's real wage. But he has talked about that there are going to be some changes to it. He's talked about a process over the summer in which we look very carefully at what's in that Productivity Commission report into the childcare system. The most significant report since the 90s, commissioned by Susan Lee, the Assistant Minister for Education, has been doing
So where do you want this to land? Do you think those earning more than 150 grand should get anything?
What the Prime Minister has said and what I think makes sense is that what we want to do is get to the nub of the issue. Now, the nub of the issue is that there are a range of factors that are affecting women's participation in the workforce. One of those factors is the economic impacts of leaving work to be at home having a baby. Another of those factors is the cost of childcare. Now, the draft report of the Productivity Commission on childcare made the point that I
just want to get your view on this. Do you think women earning more than 150 grand should get anything?
I think there is a case to be using means testing principles. That's generally a good principle.
I'll take that as a no. You don't think those earning more than 150 grand should get paid parental leave?
As a general design principle when it comes to social welfare policy, to my mind, means testing is generally a good policy.
Okay. I guess the flip side of this, though, is that if you do have a cut-off point, whether it's 150 or 100 grand or wherever it is, a lot of those big companies would then have to offer their own paid parental leave for those
bear in mind,
high
a lot of
earners.
big companies do, as do a lot of government departments.
But they're also then paying a tax, an extra levy to you guys for the rest of the workforce. So
Indeed, but bear in mind we've also said we're reducing the corporate tax, so there's no net change.
And you're still going to do that?
There's no. Well, our policy is to reduce company tax by 1.5%.
Will that still be the policy next week?
And then there's a levy of 1.5%. So no net change for those large corporates. But I do just want to come back to this point about participation of women in the workforce and the fact that there's been an increase over the last 2 decades from 57% to 66% of women with a child under the age of 15 who are in the workforce. Now, that's a good thing. We want to encourage the workplace participation of women.
If this does, Nick Champion, end up with some sort of scheme that boosts access to childcare in particular, makes it more readily available, and perhaps even means test some of the childcare subsidies that are out there, would that be a good outcome?
Well, I guess we're still all a bit dazed and confused by the government's effort. We still don't have any details about this paid parental leave policy, and it's been hanging around, angering Conservative commentators, and I think confusing government backbenchers and frontbenchers because they're never quite sure where it's going to land. The problem is they've already taken $1 billion out of childcare, so it would be a funny thing to take it out in the budget and then kind of put it back in. I think Miranda's right. The government's confused about, in a lot of these areas, about what it wants to do, because on one hand it's hacking into families and worrying them in the process, and then it sort of wants to be the good guy. Oh, we're going to help you out. And I think, you know, if you gave families a choice between having stability in terms of healthcare costs and Medicare and knowing where they stood on that, and maybe just having a bit of stability in some of these areas rather than these sort of whiz-bang approach by the government, they might opt that. And I think you're right about MyEFO. This is the thing. It's going to blow a lot of these government plans out the window.
Well, we'll see where that goes. But do you think it would be a good policy if you had more childcare support?
How can I make a judgment on it? How can I make a judgment about it?
Surely you've thought about these things.
Well,
would you like to see? Okay, let me ask you something more specific.
You could ask me if I like my breakfast tomorrow, but I'm not going to know because I don't know the details of it, do I? I mean, it's hard to know with this government. If the government was making it, it might. You just wouldn't know what you're getting, would you? You would not. You might order cereal. You'd order cereal and you'd get bacon and eggs, or vice versa.
Do you think the current childcare rebate should be means tested?
Look, I think that we have to be very careful about rebates generally. I think if there's a lesson to be learnt about rebates is I think prices tend to increase in their... You increase the rebate and you tend to find prices increase as well. So I just...
So it means tested.
Well, I'm not so sure if they're a great... They're a mechanism to help affordability, and we need to help families where we can with participation. But I think you have to be very, very careful. Labor increased the rebate some time ago from 30% to 50%.
Bad idea?
Well, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but I'm saying you need to be very careful that prices don't follow.
So what do you do? I just want to pin this down.
Well,
be careful.
I'm not.
You're Nick Champion.
I'm not.
Say what you think.
Well, I think I am, but I guess I'm not.
You're halfway. You're saying be careful. What does that mean?
Well, look,
get rid of the rebate.
It's impossible to tell what the government will do.
I'm asking you.
We know that when they rip money out in the budget, that's a problem. I'm not sure if following it with a big whiz bang approach like they did with the paid parental leave, whether that will fix some of these affordability problems.
We've got to get a break in. And then I will come to you, Tim, on climate change, because I want to talk about how the government shifted ground on this a little this week as well. Stay with us.
The new Night Guard has a motion sensor to light your way, or you can set it to switch on at dusk and off at dawn. It's also a handy torch, fully charged and ready to go. And in a blackout, it lights up automatically. The new Click Night Guard is only $19.90, and it's available at Bunnings Warehouse.
It's the Barbecues Galore Red Hot Christmas Sale. 4 burner Barbies less than half price, just $3.49. This portable's an unbelievable $59. Hardwood timber settings less than half price at $3.94. Lots more in store at the Barbecues Galore Red Hot Christmas Sale.
It's our Christmas wrap-up sale with sale fares starting from a merry $39. One-way check baggage not included. Sale ends midnight December 17 unless sought out prior. Selected travel dates in 2015. Conditions apply. To book, visit jetstar.com.
It's time to take a closer look at Nissan.
Get 2014 off a great range of 2014 Nissan models, like the Pulsar ST manual, now from only $18,476.
Check out these great value Christmas gifts, all under $10.
Holman Twin Hose Gun Set, only $9.98. Irwin Jack Handsaw, $9.98. Marquee Camp Chair, just $7.45.
Lowest prices are just the beginning.
The streets a liar. I'm gonna lower you into the dark. The danger is I'm dangerous and I might just tear you apart. I'm gonna catch ya. I'm gonna get ya. Oh, I wanna taste the way.
21 Jane doesn't have a conscience today.
Shapes, light and crispy.
She's busy.
Oh.
New Shapes Light and Crispy with 75% less saturated fat. Even your conscience will love them.
This is a humble Vita Wheat whole grain. He's pretty wonderful. He gives you sustained, slow-release whole grain energy to keep you going. Arnott's Vita Wheat, made with 100% whole grains for energy that lasts.
Good to have you with us this evening. The chat during the break, I feel we could have kept going on childcare, nannies, work-life, family balance, but we must move on. I want to talk a bit about climate change because this week the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister have done something of a about-face on this. The so-called Bob Brown Bank, as Tony Abbott once called it, socialism masquerading as environmentalism. We are now going to contribute $200 million towards.
We're all socialists now.
Julie Bishop, in fact, said we'd never spend foreign aid money on climate change. Well, that's actually where the $200 million is going to come from. Miranda, what did you think of this one?
Well, I just think it's a pity because your priority, if you've got all these people sitting in refugee camps who are crying out millions of dollars they need every week just to keep these poor people housed and fed, and your priority with the UN is to put it into some fund that may or may not do something about people maybe suffering, you know, climate change events 100 years down the track. I just think the whole message is terrible, but I understand the political imperative, I guess. I think that the government could have stood firm and been a shining light for the rest of the world, but they haven't. They've capitulated. But I think they've been quite clever about it. And what Julie Bishop says is that this money was going to be spent anyway in, you know, Tuvalu and places to try and shore up their seawalls and build infrastructure. It's not just going to be frittered away in some ridiculous UN usual wasteful way.
Well, is it actually going to be spent where we want it to be spent?
Well, that's why Andrew Robb is there. And you see now why Andrew Robb had to go and escort Julie Bishop, because I heard her on AM this morning and she sounded like any other climate alarmist, just parroting those UN diplomatic speak lines about climate change. And Andrew Robb has been fantastic because what he's said is exert some discipline on it and say, we are going to make sure that the money is spent properly, and also we are going to make sure that China and India and all these countries are going to actually live up to their targets.
My understanding is that's still under debate, whether we can control that or not. Surely if we want to control it, we just keep it as part of the foreign aid budget and spend it where we want to spend it.
Well, I agree.
But David, just to be clear, what we've said is this money is going to private sector-led economic growth in the Indo-Pacific region. And in particular, Greg Hunt, the Environment Minister, has talked about the way that we envisage this being used to, for example, preserve rainforests.
But can we guarantee that?
Well, that's a focus of our negotiations, and that's the...
That's the point I'm saying. It's still under negotiation. If you want to spend it on all those things, why not just spend it on all those things?
We've obviously made a judgment that there's some merit in doing this.
What's the merit?
In the context of the broader negotiations.
What's the merit?
But we've also made it clear that this is the basis on which we are going to spend the money. The basis on which we are going to spend the money.
And what's the merit?
Well, the merit is in the context of the broader negotiations. I mean, there's a process going on in Lima right now, which is now part of the lead up to the Paris, the UN Climate Change Convention in Paris.
So what's the point of doing this instead of just spending it on the things you list?
Well, we've made a judgment that this is a thing that's worth doing as part of the context of the negotiations.
Why?
In the overall totality of the negotiating process.
It's a good thing for the totality of the negotiating process.
And we've got a clear idea about what the money's going to be used for. We've made it clear it's going to be used for...
I mean, you've just said that it's under negotiation, whether we can spend it where we want to spend it.
But, David, if we're putting forward money and we're saying this is the basis on which we'll put it forward, you either get that outcome or you don't. So that's the condition that the Foreign Minister and the Trade Minister representing Australia in Lima have laid down.
If you can't spend it in those areas, it won't be spent at all.
Well, we've made it clear this is the basis on which we're...
Is it enough money?
Well, I mean, what you've just seen is the biggest backflip known to man. I mean, they tell us...
But I'm asking you whether you think it's enough money.
Well, 200 million sounds like a good start, I suppose.
So it needs to be more.
Well, what we know is the most effective way of battling climate change is by having a price on carbon, isn't it? I mean, that's the most effective way. Instead,
that's not happening internationally.
Well, it is. It's happening in California. It's happening
in Europe. So you reckon
in
Paris next year they're going to be an agreement on a price on carbon?
Well, what if they do? This government's going to be left like a shag.
Do you seriously think they're going to agree?
Eternal.
Here's the international price on carbon.
Well, I guess the thing about this, hope springs eternal in terms of actually addressing climate change and global warming. It is a serious problem that faces all of humanity. You would presume at some point the world gets its act together. And when it does, this government is going to be left like a shag on a rock, because what they're going to have is direct action, which, as the target grows...
It's kind of what this International Green Fund is.
Well, but as a target grows, so does the cost.
Right.
In terms.
Let me ask you about this international
agreement. And that's why they're
should Australia be part of something that allows China, specifically China, to keep growing its emissions? Tim?
Well, there's a fundamental issue of, a moral issue, which is that developing countries are going to take longer to get there than countries that have developed, essentially using cheap carbon fuels over the course of the period. The problem for the government...
I'm sure you've been to China recently, right? And China is a diverse country. Yes, there's a lot of poverty there, but you walk down the streets of Shanghai, Hong Kong, Beijing, many of those big cities, there's a lot of wealth.
And I think we've seen the Chinese government take steps that Tony Abbott and his colleagues said that they never would over the course of the last few months.
So should they be allowed to keep on increasing their emissions if we're required to cut ours?
This is why this $200 million thing is a very clever political trick, of course. Everybody's focused on...
Yeah, don't sidestep this one. I just want to ask whether you think
I want to come back to this. The $200 million thing is the issue everybody's talking about. What are the fundamentals here? Is Australia going to play a leadership role in the negotiations about what the next iteration of climate change policy is globally?
Why should we?
Now, the problem for the government...
1.5% of the world's emissions.
Because we're a big net exporter, we've got an interest in this area, we actually want to be an industry leader. Now, the issue for us is, are we going to achieve a global climate change treaty or any instrument if we insist on the same standards being applied to every country? Clearly, that is not going to be the case. So there will have to be allowances made, both for pragmatic reasons and also for social justice reasons, not just countries like China, India, much smaller developing economies.
Do you agree with that?
The truth is it's going to be a complicated framework.
As Julie Bishop, as Foreign Minister, has said, we do want to make the argument that we shouldn't necessarily accept this proposition that the developing economies need to use exactly the same polluting technologies, for example, that Western countries were using 100 years ago or 50 years ago.
So coal isn't good for humanity?
In other words, you can see a leapfrog...
They shouldn't use coal?
You can see a leapfrog effect in technology.
So they shouldn't use coal?
And just let me make the point about leapfrog. You see this, for example, in the communication sector. There's a number of countries that have gone from having a very poor fixed line network to...
We're nearly out of time, but you're saying they should skip coal and find some other
clean coal
technology that...
I'm simply making the point that as the Foreign Minister has said, our negotiating position will be to say we don't necessarily accept this proposition, that there aren't options for developing countries to move to newer generations.
But this is the problem for this show. The policy is built on sand, a fundamental hostility to climate science and antipathy to people who advocate this position. They're coming up against the reality that the science is settled. The cheapest
China's
method...
going to do nothing. That's the reality.
The cheapest method, of course, is engaging globally with a market system.
This will be a fascinating debate next year as well, I know.
Sure.
Paul Fletcher, Miranda Devine, Tim Ayres and Nick Champion, thank you all very much for joining us. Thanks for your company as well. We will be back for our final show of the year next week. Hope you can join us then. Bye for now.